Good morning. While my oatmeal cooks this morning, I want to address a particular topic, and then we're going to move on into my little library space, the hallway, and talk about something else. But yesterday I had an online discussion with someone who is an expert and an experiencer in this field of reincarnation, who's my senior in that matter. But she's influenced, I would say, by a particular idea in this field that I would like to address today. And that is the influence of Dr. Ian Stevenson, and in particular, the sort of orthodoxy or religion that's developed after his passing, where his ideas have been kind of concretized, if that's the correct word, fossilized into an orthodoxy. And I think it's unfortunate. Some of it has to do with Dr. Stevenson's own personality, but some of it is just the way things are and the way people treat legacies. If my legacy survives, I hope they don't fossilize mine. So, I've tried to take some steps in that direction. But what I kind of imagine is people, either grasping at straws, claiming things for Mathew Franklin Whittier's pen that weren't really his, which kind of changes the whole view. Like, for example, there's some pieces out there with imitators or people that took something of Matthew's and ran with it, and it has in it something that's cruel to animals, or people or something. And I would hate to see those things claimed for Mathew, and it would change people's idea of what he was. So it's tough to preserve a legacy, but then it's tough to preserve it properly and accurately too. So anyway, I became aware of Dr. Stevenson when I was working on my documentary, In Another Life, Reincarnation in America, which I started in 1997. And then I wrote him and asked him to be in the documentary itself. And initially he agreed, and then he backed out. So I'm going to read a couple letters from him. But he was not real impressed with hypnosis as a means of obtaining past life memories, but he wasn't entirely dead set against it. His particular concern, if I understand it correctly, was to defeat what's called cryptomnesia, which is false memory. False memory, very simply, is somebody had read a book or seen a movie, or now, of course, there's the internet. Back when he was researching, there wasn't that problem. And they've forgotten what they read. And then they go under hypnosis and they start to remember some very elaborate, very specific scenario. Well, turns out it's very difficult to prove that that was real because it's in a book that he either could have read or did read. And therefore the skeptics can just dismiss this stuff out of hand because, it's in such and such a novel, And the fact that he didn't actually read it doesn't matter to them, but it spoils the whole proof question. So he, of course, was under tremendous attack. He was in a defensive posture, really. So as a result, he looked for a method that would completely defeat that false memory error. And that was to work with children, young children, who remembered a past life vividly. And there was no possible way that they could have read about their memories or seen them in a film or, anything else of that nature. These are children in rural India who remember very specific details about a past life in some town that they've never been to and that their parents don't talk about. And he took it from there. Well, again, that was a defensive posture. It was a reaction to the skeptics. And it was also part of his personality. I think he had a conservative personality, which we'll see in the letters that I'm about to read. But it really has absolutely nothing to do with proving reincarnation if you can get around the false memory error in some other way. But what the orthodoxy has done is to say that only child cases are valid. There's no other valid way to prove reincarnation. And if you're trying to prove an adult case, or if you used reincarnation, your case is automatically considered unscientific. See, so that's the orthodoxy. And I take exception to that because my case gets around the false memory error in an entirely different way. It's an adult case. I did use hypnosis a couple times, although it was by no means the primary method. One of my memories under hypnosis did check out in the deep historical record to an amazing degree, like 5 or 6 unique points, things that I couldn't possibly have known about. So I know it works. Personally, I think that hypnosis has to be used properly. It's a tool in the toolbox, and it can be used to good effect, but you have to put certain constraints on it. One of them is the subject has to be absolutely dedicated to the truth. And we see that in the case of Captain Robert Snow, the head of homicide investigation for the city of Indianapolis at that time. And he went under hypnotic regression on a dare from a colleague. He vividly experienced 3 past lives. One of them he could research because it was fairly recent, James Carroll Beckwith, a minor painter. And he set about trying to disprove it. And this is a professional detective, you understand. So he ended up proving it against his own will, like 30 points. In the book, it's 28 or something, but he told me privately he proved all 30 of them eventually. So we know that hypnosis can work, but you have to have somebody like Captain Snow who's absolutely dedicated to the truth and will not indulge in fantasy and mix it up with reality. That can be done under hypnosis. Okay? In my experience, it can be done. Even in the deep state that Captain Snow was in, apparently it can be done. Certainly in the light trance that I was in, I had full control over whether I wanted to follow any suggestions that the hypnotist gave or not. So the idea that hypnosis makes people suggestible and that it can be, it can be anything and it's totally useless, that's just urban legend. That's myth, So let's look at these letters that I received from Dr. Ian Stevenson. This is one where he was still considering it. He had said yes, he would be in the documentary. I think what happened is that I sent him a working copy of the documentary, and in it was Marge Reeder, who used hypnosis. And I think her method was not quite as tight as it could have been, but she was getting real results. But he didn't want to be in the same show as her. See, I think that's why he backed out, although he didn't say so. But anyway, this is January 23, 2001. Dear Mr. Sakellarios, I went off to India soon after receiving your letter of December 8th. Your point about the, quote, famous person cases seems well taken. Many of them may be, quote, near misses in which the person has some, quote, real memories and then prematurely concludes that he or she was a particular person, often a famous one. Reading about that famous person and the person concerned then becomes impressed by similarities of taste and even events. Thus, we have 2 claimants to have been Lola Montez, I don't know who that is, 3 to have been Thomas Jefferson, and many other duplicates. We keep a file now in 2 thick folders on what we call, quote, extravagant claims. I think that was something I suggested to him, and he was concurring, that what could happen in these multiple famous cases is, just as he says, that the famous person is similar, he happens to know of them, and he or she assumes that he was that famous person, when actually it was somebody somewhat similar. I think there's another possible explanation, and that's fans. I think if somebody was a tremendous fan of Charlie Chaplin or Thomas Jefferson or anybody, and during that lifetime they became obsessed with that person and learned a whole bunch of facts about their life, when they reincarnate, they might assume that, oh, gee, I was that person. Well, no, they were a fan of that person. I've never tried to test that theory. Now he goes on in a more relevant vein here. I persist in thinking that nearly all cases of hypnotic regression are worthless. Again, however, many of the personalities evoked with hypnosis may be similar to historical novels, part fact, part fiction. Now, however, he says, I am not averse to trials of hypnosis with children who seem to remember a previous life, but cannot furnish verifiable details of names of places, people or places. I am trying now to arrange a trial with hypnosis for a child in London who, when much younger, insisted that he had died in an airship that caught fire, and he puts in parentheses with a question mark, the Hindenburg disaster. And then he says, television producers have repeatedly disappointed me. I am waiting for one who will produce a full-length documentary. I think it will be a long wait. With good wishes, yours sincerely, Ian Stevenson. I'll just show you that letter with his signature. You know, you can always pause a video and read anything that they show you on the screen in still format. So I think he was considering it at that point, and then he backed out. I just interviewed Tom Schroeder, who was a reporter for the Washington Post, who traveled with Stevenson instead of interviewing Stevenson, so it worked out just fine. Now, here's another letter. Here's the rejection letter. December 1, 2000, I think. No, this is early too. December 1, 2000. Dear Mr. Sakellarios, thank you for sending a copy of the videotape of your documentary on reincarnation. I also received the 2 CDs you sent. Although I know that you wish to present a serious documentary, I think you are unwise to bracket cases evoked during hypnosis with the spontaneous statements of very young children. So he doesn't want to get mixed up, with the hypnosis cases. So he had a prejudice against hypnosis. But here's the truth of the matter, as it looks to me. Of course, I would have to maybe ask Dr. Tucker about this to get a definite answer. I think he was much more concerned about the flack that he was getting from his critics about false memory than he was about hypnosis per se. But it has now come down to us in the official Stevenson orthodoxy that it was hypnosis that he was concerned about. So in my case, it doesn't matter whether I used hypnosis or not, because I can get around the cryptomnesia, false memory objection because of the nature of my case. And that is because Mathew Franklin Whittier had this huge legacy of written work, literary work, in which all these details are there and could be used to corroborate my past life memories. And yet it was so deeply hidden in the historical record, I could not possibly have ever seen it or known anything about it. So it achieves the same objective as studying young children. And, as I said in one of my interviews, it doesn't matter where I got the memories. If I had no possible way of knowing them, and if they check out in the deep historical record, something weird is going on. Either I'm cheating. If I'm not cheating, there's something paranormal going on. Even if I pull them out of the trash can, there's some kind of weird synchronicity going on. Okay, so I don't know. That's just logic. Sometimes logic, influences people, and sometimes it doesn't. Now, I'm going to go pull my Scottish oatmeal off the stove, and then we're going to adjourn to the library. Okay, we are now in my library, which is a tiny hallway in my studio attic apartment, where I keep the original Mathew Franklin Whittier material. And we're going to delve into one particular question. And we were just talking about proof and proving reincarnation. And of course, this applies to proving Mathew Franklin Whittier's authorship of various formerly anonymous works. Now, some of these things I could prove outright, like the article that is now being published very soon in Real Paranormal Magazine, which shows the evidence that Matthew and Abby were the real and original authors of A Christmas Carol. That's pretty strongly proven, believe it or not. But there are some cases I ran into that I wasn't able to absolutely nail, and I think they're kind of interesting. I've learned to accept the tension of not knowing for sure. All through my life, I was very compulsive that I had to know. I had to nail things down. I had to be sure. Well, I've kind of lightened up on that a little bit. I know I'm right about the case. I know I'm right generally about Matthew, but there's a few of these attributions that I can't quite nail down. So I'm going to present one of those today, and I'm going to show you my logic. Now, first of all, we have to go to the Boston Chronotype, which is the radical Boston newspaper that Matthew published quite a bit in, as Ethan Spike and as other characters. And I'll show you, I don't have this particular edition of the Chronotype, but I'll show you what a Boston Chronotype looks like. It's a big paper. He was a forward-thinking fellow. The editor, Elijah Wright, actually helped to invent insurance, of all things. He became an atheist later in his life. But he has a train going on a trestle representing progress. and you'll see the weekly chronotype. This is these papers had a daily and a weekly. This is the weekly version. So in the chronotype, I'm not sure whether this is weekly or daily. It's September 23, 1846. I think it's a daily. Is a poem called Stanzas Written at Midnight. It's unsigned. I am absolutely certain that this was Mathew's, in terms of scholarship and also internally. And I'm going to read it. Stanzas, and now remember, I should say that Mathew had insomnia. So this is really kind of about his insomnia. When the nightly dews down falling moisten all the sheds around, fearful is the caterwauling, echoing through the dark profound. Wildly wails the old gray tomcat, sad and mournful is the sound. In the night that voice upswelling falls upon my waking ear. Now of vanished joys 'tis telling, now it trembles as with fear. Dark as glooms the starless midnight doth this tale of woe appear. Lonely on the cold shed sitting, thoughts within thee crowding fast, shadowy forms around thee flitting, murmuring low the autumn blast. Is thy heart in sorrow mourning feline spirits of the past? Didst thou leave thy pleasures real, vainly youthful dreams pursue, shadowy hopes and joys ideal ever passing from thy view? Did the heart, once true and loyal, seek another love more new? Dost thou mourn ambition blighted, visions to thy spirit dear, that in sorrow still delighted, ever fleeting, ever near? Is thy heart now all benighted, as the midnight cold and drear? Speak, oh speak thy hidden sorrow, ere the looming day shall dawn. Haply from it I may borrow respite from my thoughts forlorn. Speak, for spirit-like the morrow bids thee from the shed be gone. Mathew, of course, is speaking of himself. He has lost Abby. He has remarried by 1846 in this unfortunate marriage that was arranged sight unseen by his mother, as I've determined, and he regrets it, and he's still in love with Abby. So he's projecting his own feelings onto the tomcat, you see. It's an excellent poem, I think. Now, I'm sure he wrote that. I can feel it. But we know, or I know, and have shown, that Mathew could, or did, bring back his old ideas, his favorite ideas. Since these things were published in daily newspapers, he would come back to it 5, 10, 15 years later for another publication. Well, I don't know when he wrote this. This is Partentonian Patchwork by Benjamin Penhallow Shillaber, ostensibly by him. But it contains a series called Blifkin's the Martyr, which he had published serially earlier in, late 50s, early 60s, something like that. Let's see when this book was published. It's quite a bit later, I think. This is 1873, so he had published these many years earlier. Through a long and tortuous route of clues, I've determined that these are loosely based on stories Mathew told him, as a friend, about this second arranged marriage, when he was Blifkin's the Martyr. In the Carpetbag, which Shillaber edited and Mathew was heavily involved in, there is one piece which is by style is definitely Mathew's work, signed K.K. Blifkins. So Mathew originated the name Blifkins. And these are stories about him, but they're not written by Mathew. I think they're mostly, if not all, written by Shillaber based on stories that Mathew told him. Some of them could not actually be about Mathew, but most of them, I think, are at least inspired by those stories Mathew told him. In this particular story, he has put out poison for a stray cat, which apparently was caterwauling. And I think he did it because his wife urged him to do it, and he finally agreed, and then he regrets it. So he wrote a poem to this cat, and I'm extrapolating that he was the one that put the poison out. On finding one turned up in a corner of my front yard, very dead. Thou howling, yowling, growling pussy, thou night and day disturbing hussy, No more thou'lt wake the feeling fussy with thy fierce clamor, driving the quietest to curse thee like tongs and hammer. Full many a night thou'st kept me waking, my nerves like aspen leaflets shaking, till some convenient missile taking, a jug or boot, I've dashed it in among ye, raking, and made ye scoot. Thy voice I knew when fiercely bawling, 'bove all thy brother's notes appalling, there, mid my flowers, pulling and hauling, and mischief making, but thou hast stopped thy caterwauling, and no mistaking. And yet I'm sad to see thee lying, though long my patience thou'st been trying. I look upon thee, no denying, with feeling sickening, and wonder how thou felt'st when dying of sudden strychnine. Didst thou look back with thought regretful at making people vexed and fretful, or that thy horn of joy not yet full should be capsizen, or grieve that thou wert such a fool as eat the pizen? That's a P-I-Z-E-N is something Mathew used very often in Ethan Spike. I'll search it and put that up in a graphic before I edit this. Alas, like many a fool that's human, seen every day, or man or woman, who grasp at pleasures fair and bloomin', thou'st reckless bitten, and found too soon that sin's consumin' to man and kitten. And where he said capsizin', he has an asterisk and a footnote. It says, quote, capsizin' his'n porridge dish from the Canterbury Tales. This is classic Mathew Franklin Whittier. Shillaber didn't write like this. So what Shillaber would do was write about Mathew, just like he did that I recently talked about with The Sensitive Man and Philanthropos. He would write whimsically about Mathew because Mathew amused him, but then he would actually incorporate Mathew's real poetry. See? So that's what we have here. So that's two where Mathew's written on this theme. Now, we get to what I was going to originally. In Harvardiana, this is the student publication of Harvard. We're talking the 1830s. There is a poem just like these, which I could swear is Mathew's work. But it is signed with the pseudonym Elah. I'm going to try to show this to the camera. Let's see how close I can get. I want this one. We got a blank screen. There we go. See if you can see Elah down in the corner. Underneath it is penciled Hail. Well, the copy that I bought online, it so happens that whoever owned this had penciled in the actual names of everybody who signed with pseudonyms. And Elah is just a reverse of the name Hale. This is young Edward Everett Hale, who was a child prodigy and was attending Harvard at age 13. He signed that poem. And he has a number of poems in here, and they're excellent. He was brilliant as a poet. But they were of a totally different quality. None of them was like this Tomcat Serenade I'm about to read to you. And there's another one that's, I believe Mathew wrote to Abby, which we'll get to in a minute. His poems read like a king with a harem. You know, he likes this one, but he also likes this one, and he likes this one, and she has this thing, and then she has the beautiful eyes, and she, well, if he had been 17 or 18, his classmates, this would have been a real Don Juan type of character. But this is a 13-year-old boy who they treat like a mascot, no doubt, like little brother. And he imagines that all of these beautiful women, these young ladies, are his, romantic interests, and they're just they're like ants, ants and big sisters, So that's who wrote. But somehow or other, he has claimed two of Mathew's poems, I believe. And here we are back to what I said, that I can't nail this down. I'm pretty darn sure. There was other things that tied those other poems to Mathew, some of which I talked about and some of which I didn't. But the other ones I've read are pretty definitely Mathew's work. I've got reason to believe that. Now here we have the Tomcat Serenade with an explanatory index. Now I found a poem that has one of these explanatory indexes recently. I don't know if it was a pedagogic technique where, somebody would write a poem or comment on a poem and write their comments in the margin. It seems to have been a known style. But the comments explaining what's going on in the poem are given in the margin. So I'm not sure quite how to read this. I'll read each stanza and then give you what the comment is. It is the hour, the dewy hour of fading light and folded flower, and night and love and beauty's power, meow. And at the right it says, the cat discourseth of the night. Sweet tabby, from thy garret high, I pray thee send a loving eye, and hear thy faithful Tommy sigh, meow. Matthew loved garrets. He lived in one like I am right now in a garret, which is to say an attic. He says, and prayeth for his mistress's favor. That's the comment. Now sleeps the moonlight on the hill, the winds are hushed, the waves are still, all silent, save the bubbling rill, meow. Oh, come with me across the street, and I will spread a noble treat of all that tabbies love to eat, meow. And the comment, the cat inviteth his mistress to a banquet. Oh, bid me not alone depart, I feel the burning teardrop start. Oh, speak and heal a bursting heart, meow. The cat pleadeth his sufferings. And we will have a cozy chat, for I've a splendid haunch of rat, just cooked to suit a lady cat, meow. And describeth his treat, says the comment. I love thee for thy whiskered face, thy tuneful purr, thine untaught grace, those eyes of green, that noiseless pace, meow. And I don't know what sheweth, sheweth, sheweth why the cat loveth. I love thee not for hoarded pelf of stolen scraps from pantry shelf, but oh, I love thee for thyself, meow. And why he loveth not. Why the cat loveth and why he loveth not is a commentary. And if another cat shall dare with look of love on thee to glare, by heaven I'll eat him hide and hair, meow. The cat waxeth jealous. For though, alas, in vain I pine, no baser breath shall... I'll start again. For though, alas, in vain I pine, no baser breath shall soil the shrine once hallowed by a flame of mine, meow. And showeth resentment. The cat waxeth jealous and showeth resentment. Ah, cruel kit, she will not deign to hear my cry, to soothe my pain. My light is quenched, my hopes are vain, meow. The cat getteth hypochondriac. Too great I feel this load of woe, soon, soon in death I slumber low, and o'er my grave shall catnip grow, meow. And prophesieth his coming death. Requiescat in pace. That's feline Latin. Yet once again before I die, I raise my feeble love notes high, and loud, and yet a louder cry, meow, yow, yow. The cat exalteth his voice. And then the poet exclaimeth from the window. Now, I'm not sure this part was written by Matthew. It may be. The fiend torment that squalling cat. Out, night-disturbing vermin, scat. I'll spoil your beauty here. I'll spoil your beauty, dear, take that. And then underneath in brackets, discharges a... I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with these. Dischargeth a poker. Grand finale of caterwauling. The cat decampeth. And then it's signed Elah. I think that Hale added the last one. And this is typical of worldly people who steal Matthew's work. They can't resist sticking their worldly thumb into it. Albert Pike did that with Abbey's poetry. A number of people did that with Matthew's work. And this appeared, and I don't have the date right now because I'm just now thinking of it. It appeared in The Liberator, William Lloyd Garrison's paper. It appeared in The Liberator while William Lloyd Garrison was away, and his associate editor was manning the paper, apparently, because when Garrison came back, he left a personal note that he would not have accepted it, that they don't have that kind of stuff in his paper. Well, I think it's because of the last verse that Edward Everett Hale had inserted. And yet, Matthew was personal friends with Garrison, and other pieces of his appeared a couple years later in the liberator. So did Matthew submit it this way? Did Matthew write that? I don't know. These are mysteries. But I'm saying Matthew wrote that because this is written about Abby. When he extols the virtues of the lady cat that he's enamored of, this is Abby. And it says, I love thee not for hoarded pelf of stolen scraps from pantry shelf. That's a reference to her family money, which came from slavery. See? And that she's aristocracy. But, oh, I love thee for thyself. This is to reassure Abby that he loves her for herself. And then he's jealous. Matthew was jealous. We've got that elsewhere. And so on. So I'm saying that was Mathew Franklin Whittier writing about insomnia, about cats caterwauling, and about Abby. Very much like the others. Now, this would have been early, like 1832 roughly, when Matthew was 17 or 18, and when Matthew was 17 or 18, and Abby was 14 or 15, somewhere in there. Now we go to the October edition. So now Matthew is 20 and Abby is 16. I don't know what I just said before, but anyway, Matthew's 4 years older. He's 20 and she is 16. 16, apparently, as I seem to remember, was the hurdle, the cutoff point where it was okay to be physically involved with a girl. When I say physically involved, not necessarily sex, but you could at least express your affection physically. Below that age, it was not acceptable. In the October version, there is a poem on the back. I don't have the back cover, so here is what the poem looks like. It's called To Adela, and it's signed Elah. Underneath it says, Hail, somebody wrote in. And this is totally different than his other love poems, because this is a poem to a particular girl being in love with a particular girl. And it's a serious poem. Now, not to say that Edward Everett Hale couldn't have gotten a serious crush on one girl, possible, but Adela apparently is one of the two names that Matthew would use throughout his career to secretly refer to Abby. The other was Juliana. So Juliana or Adeline, or Julia or Adela, more often Julia and Juliana, but occasionally Adeline or Adela, Matthew would use as a secret reference to Abby, because I think she kind of tried those names on when she was young. That's my guess. This is extrapolation from many clues and plus my own intuition. So I'm going to read, it's a very personal poem, but I'll go ahead and read it here. To Adela. Lady, by the stars that glisten in yon conscious arch above, by the viewless forms that listen to my plighted vow of love, by this heart which fondly flingeth all its incense on thy shrine, speak the word that rapture bringeth. Whisper, dearest, thou art mine. Oh, delay not. Bitter sorrow for thy coyness have I borne. Let me not another morrow feel within the festering thorn. Ah, that gentle smile thou wearest speaks of pity for my pain. Bless thee, sweetest, dearest. Let me see that smile again. Lady, do those witching glances and that bosom's gentle swell and the soft blush that entrances sign a joy words cannot tell? Speak they not the first of blisses, first on earth and first above? Seal the holy bond with kisses, holy, for the bond is love. So Matthew is asking Abby, now that she's 16, can they not express their love physically? Now, note the beginnings. Lady, by the stars that glisten in yon conscious arch above. Abby loved the stars, and she believed that they were conscious beings. We have that in one of her poems, and we have it over and over and over in Matthew's poetry. Whenever he talks about Abby, the stars come in, see? So we have it right there, the very first line. Not only the stars, but that they're conscious. So this as good as identifies it as Mathew Franklin Whittier's work. So what this means is that she's been in love with him for years. but she's shy about it. See, so she said yes. By the way, so I've got it in my book, and I'm very honest about the fact that I can't clinch it. But I'm personally, I'm sure. But as far as trying to prove that to skeptics is concerned, the other day I wrote to someone who manages the Walden Pond website concerning Henry David Thoreau. In that, they have one of Mathew's unsigned reviews of Thoreau. And I know it's his, and I know that he wrote reviews of talks for the Portland Transcript for many, many years, connected with the Mercantile Library Association. And I have some evidence. I have one smoking gun in that regard. And I wrote to him and told him, at times I get peevish, I get just fed up. And instead of trying to explain things to people, I just tell them flat out. So when Mathew wrote this, well, I did that in this case. And he wrote back and said, of course, I would need, corroboration of this, scholastic corroboration. And I wrote him a pretty long letter telling him I can't give you scholastic corroboration because none of the other scholars would sign off on this. Nobody else knows but me. See, I'm the world expert on Mathew Franklin Whittier. Nobody else knows anything about him. So it's impossible to get anybody else with credentials to sign off on any of these things, even though I'm right. So, plus my evidence is so deeply embedded in 2,300 of Mathew's published works that I know and have studied and have examined as a whole with all their interconnections, that it's very difficult to sit down in a letter and give somebody the one thing that proves it to their satisfaction. I'd have to sit down with you for 3 or 4 weeks and explain it to you. You can't get it on a silver platter. You have to be interested enough. I'm trying to back up where my eyes are in the shot. You have to be interested enough to sit down with me and look at the evidence because nobody else in the world knows anything about this. And you can't do that. So I tried my best to explain this to him. And I gave him the one little smoking gun. And I haven't heard back. Now, I did hear back from the Morgan Library and Museum in New York, who hold the handwritten draft written by Dickens of A Christmas Carol. I'm using that, and I'm zooming in on things that he scribbled out, that he redacted with a heavy corkscrew motion. And I'm going to zoom in on that in my article about A Christmas Carol and show that he was dumbing down Abbey's more deeply spiritual work for the public. I've got one clear incidence of that and one possible. It's clear in one case that he did that. But I needed permission, and I thought they weren't going to write me back because I was completely upfront with them. I didn't mince words at all because this is a permissions issue, and I don't want them to come back and say, oh, you didn't tell us it was reincarnation, or you didn't tell us, that you were going to prove that Dickens didn't write this book. But they did. 2 days after the deadline, they did, and they charged a rather hefty fee of $80 per image. I thought it was going to be more like 20. The editor's going to help me out with it, but I don't know if he's going to pay that much. We're talking $250 for 3 images. So I'll have to come up with it myself, which I told the editor, you pay what you were planning on paying when I thought it was 20 each, and then I'll pay the rest. I don't know how generous he's going to be. But anyway, they did come through. So it's possible this fellow with Walden Pond will come through. I keep trying. My guess is when people are exposed to this kind of information, it bounces off the first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time. Maybe around the 6th time, they start to think about it and take it seriously. Up until then, they just dismiss it. So that's why I need to get this stuff out there so people can be exposed to it from different sources multiple times. Because if they're only exposed to it once, I'll never get anywhere. Ideally, I would like to have advertising funds. But somebody on YouTube suggested that I use, I forget what they're called, one of these services online, they're crowdsourcing. But all of those sources have tiers. And they've set it up to where there's an inner circle of people that pay more money. And an outer circle of people only get limited access to the information. Well, I won't go there because that's unethical. access to my information has nothing to do with how much money you have or how much money you're willing to pay. I won't do it. And I don't know of any of these crowdsourcing websites and sources that will let you just put your stuff out there and say donate what you feel motivated to. You'll all get the same thing, you know. If I find one of those, I'll try it. I don't know. There's not enough people looking at my information for that to even work because nobody's going to see it, you know. How are they going to know to go there? So, you know, how do you go from zero to... You know, while we're on that analogy of speed, I've often thought of Back to the Future, where he had to get the DeLorean up to 88 miles an hour before he hit the wall. And my situation is very much like that. I have to get up to 88 miles an hour before I run out of money. Because if I don't get up to 88 miles an hour, if I only get up to 87 or 86, I'm going to hit the wall. You know, and I can't go back because my internet presence is so eccentric, shall we say, that I don't know if I can even get a job. So it's not like I can go back and erase my internet presence and say I'm going to pretend like none of this ever happened. You know, the bridge is burned behind me. So I have to hit 88 miles an hour. Right now, I think I'm at about 10 miles an hour. So we shall see about that. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that these poems in Harvardiana were Mathew's. Now, how they got in the possession of young Edward Everett Hale, that he claimed them, I have no earthly idea. But Mathew would have written these in 1832. Edward Everett Hale was only about 10 years old when these would have been written. They were published in 1836, which is when Mathew and Abby married. So how he got hold of them, I don't know. Second hand, third hand, they got passed along and somehow he got hold of them. Mathew may have published them somewhere, but my guess is that this is something unpublished that he shared, like he did with the Raven, that he shared with somebody unwisely, gave them a copy of it, trusting that they wouldn't, you know, give it away or publish it. And they went ahead and gave it to Edward Everett Hale, or maybe Mathew gave it directly to him. I don't know. Maybe Mathew mentored him for a while. It's quite possible. What I feel looking at Edward Everett Hale's photograph, and this is instructive because recognition memory and feeling memory is pretty accurate. I don't like him at all. I really dislike him. You know, and when I get a strong reaction like that, positive or negative, I tend to trust it as probably being authentic. So, and Mathew particularly disliked the people who betrayed him this way. He writes scathingly about Margaret Fuller. He writes scathingly, albeit briefly, of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. These are the people that plagiarized him, you know. So that may be the reason that I get that reaction. I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of an interesting case, and it's beautiful poetry. You can see that just like in The Raven, Mathew put a touch of humor over serious things, except occasionally he would write his full heart, like he did with the poem to Adela. There's no humor in that. That's straight. But most of the time, he had a little bit of humor in what he put in, what he wrote. So that's for today. I'm sure it's overly long. We seem to have 8 people now who will actually watch some portion of these videos. I don't have the fortitude to go in and see how long people are actually watching for on average. Last time I looked, it was 0.06. Which means that nothing I'm saying now will be heard by anybody during this era. But we shall see, and thank you once again for watching.